Captain Franz at the helm so steer. Gather round the partnership's deck.
Schrepf's commands.
Tales from the leaders of the partnership train. So we chant by the podcast glow. Through veritable seas to boxes flow. Dar dive. Hoist the sail.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Partnership. I'm super excited to have with me today Nick Valluri, who is the Director of Strategic Partnerships at Dropbox. And before that, Nick headed up partnerships at Coda, worked at Zapier, which is the biggest iPaaS platform, and then also Box, Google, several others. Like, you've basically done the whole tour around the valley. So I'm incredibly excited to chat with you, Nick, because this has been like a couple months in the making. And one of the things which was super interesting when we first chatted, which was when you were at Coda, and we actually talked about Coda and Hopin partnering up, was just kind of like the wide variety of different types of integrations you guys had. Like, you had like your API and SDK, and you had developers and like all kinds of different ways of integrating with Coda. And so that's what we want to talk about today. Is like, how do you build integrations? Like, what options do you have? And so I'm going to throw the first question to you. We only have half an hour. How do you prioritize product partnerships? Like at Coda, at Zapier, etc. Like, how do you know who to build even an integration with?
Yeah, it's a great question. And yes, also thanks for having me. I'm super excited. I know, this has been a while in the making. And like, just want to say one of the things I love about what we do is you build relationships with people that sort of outlast the deals that you do. Like, you and I started talking about, an integration. Don't know if that integration still exists or what the latest with Hopin and Coda is, but you and I still stayed connected over the years and are now having this chat. So I think that's just awesome. In terms of the question you asked, product partnerships, I think it's a great way to frame it, because some people ask, like, how do you get product partnerships done, or like, what's the path to easy integrations? And it's kind of misunderstanding the prompt, because the real question is, like, should you build an integration? Like, should this integration need to exist? Is somebody asking for it? Is it a customer? Is it a partner? Is it a CEO that just had a beer with another CEO and is asking why we don't work with this company? Not that that's ever happened to any of us, but for me, I think the first thing I look at is it strategic to something that my company is doing? Like, I think that's, at the end of the day, if you have a operationally excellent company and you have OKRs or strategy and kind of long-term vision, big rocks, whatever you want to call it, that's the fastest path to determining if an integration should matter. So say at Dropbox, we have a video product called Dropbox Replay. That's a totally different set of partners than on the file sync and share side. And so it was a new motion, a new idea. And sometimes those are difficult to take 0 to 1, but it was a strategic priority for the company. So we actually had resourcing, we had teams that were working on it and putting together strategy and actually going out to potentially build the integration. So those are honestly the layups, I would say. Like, when you have a motivated team ready to build the integration, when it's part of a company OKR that everybody knows and can refer to, like, that's a pretty much as close to a slam dunk as you can get for a product partnership. Where it gets a little trickier is that next step down, where it's, there is some synergy. Maybe some customers have requested it. Maybe, even a hyper motivated sales team has done the analysis to say they could close X in revenue if the partnership was done, or X is up for churn if the integration is not done. And those, when you have that hard data to back it up, it's helpful to prioritize. And I think, if you have a product team and a company in general that's oriented around revenue as a goal, those are fairly simple to prioritize as well. The next tier down is, to me, like the pure product play, right? Like the ones that are more, these products would work well together. It's just kind of like peanut butter and jelly, but I don't necessarily know if there's a path to revenue. Maybe there is. Maybe we could like co-market something together. But historically, those are pretty difficult to tie to revenue. I don't know about you. I've never purchased a product based on two companies doing a webinar together, even though that seems to be the main thing everybody focuses on. I've literally never heard of anybody buying a product through those things. But in those cases, I think I'm able to prioritize based on what the usage or activation opportunity is, whether that unlocks kind of a new vertical or use case, whether that partner is motivated to work with us and has the same success. And so that kind of brings me to the kind of underarching thing that I look for across all of these partnerships is, are you familiar with like the chicken or pig analogy?
No, I'm not familiar with the chicken or pig.
I'm glad you said no, because I love using this analogy. And I actually think it has roots from like agile methodology, but Shishir, the CEO at Coda, used to tell me this all the time. The short version is essentially a chicken and a pig get together and say, let's make a breakfast. And the chicken suggests bacon and eggs. And the pig said, well, that sounds like you're involved, but I'm committed, right? So a chicken is somebody who's involved. They're kind of like, they have a benefit, they have a part in the process. The pig is somebody whose life is on the line. They're the ones who are, it's their company, okay, or they're going to get promoted or fired on the back of what is done. And so I like to tell people to look for your pigs, to identify your pigs. And that's not to say there's not a world in which there's chickens you do deals with too. And you definitely shouldn't call your prospective partners pigs. But find those ones who are like, we deeply care. Yeah, I love it. I mean, it's probably, if you're a vegetarian, it's probably slightly offensive, but that's okay. It's important that you identify who really has skin in the game, who is going to be committed on the journey with you. And I think typically, if you're experiencing that, the partnership has potential. And if you don't have that, it's going to be tough to do anything meaningful.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I mean, there was so much. Like, hey, that's like a phenomenal analogy. I'll definitely use that. I only know chicken and egg for marketplaces. I didn't know chicken and pig, which is equally great. I think, like, yeah, to your point, like, it makes so much sense to look at it in 3 steps, where it's like there's some no-brainers. Like, they're just integrations which just are a must-have, and your customers will not sign up if you don't have them. Then, like, there are customers which have choose tools and they want to connect them, and your sales team might be able to create that analysis. I don't actually think I've ever seen a sales team do that analysis. As far as I know, it's always a partnerships team who actually chases up the sales team and asks them, and then they get excited once they realize that that's an opportunity. I wish more salespeople would have that initiative of like creating an analysis of like, hey, I could close X more if I would have that integration. And then there's like the bodyware, like the boardroom partnerships. Or some people like call it a Barney partnership as well, where 2 companies get together and actually just hold hands and sing and like talk about how great their value proposition will be for customers, but there are no shared customers. And so there's no real way of like validating. And yeah, especially early in my partnerships career, I fell into that trap a lot, where you have something like, one thing which was really rough for me was like when customers came to you and said like, we really want to integrate with something crypto. Like that was really big in 2021, events, crypto. It kind of made a lot of sense on like the surface. But then nobody could tell you what they wanted. And so we went out and like she found a partner who does crypto payments for events. So you can register and then your tickets is an NFT and stuff like that. But then ultimately, like nothing happened. Nobody wanted it. Why? Because like they were not customers of this tool. And then when actually push came to shove, they were chickens. They were like, well, we aren't really committed. We don't really care about crypto as much as we thought we would. So right. That's important to sort out your chickens with your pigs.
It's a really good point. And we, first of all, it's interesting to hear you say that, because it makes me very grateful for the sales team that I work with here, because they are so proactive and they really know their customer, and they make my life incredibly easy by bringing me opportunities and saying, we interviewed these customers and we think these are the gaps in these current integrations, or these are the ones that we should have. And like, we've become just such great partners in the process of trying to push our roadmap. And so, that Microsoft integration that you mentioned when we were checking in before, I don't think we talked about it yet on the show, but Dropbox launched a kind of broad Microsoft set of integrations. This is something our customers had been requesting for years. And, it's been years in the making on a number of fronts, but when I joined, I quickly allied with that sales team and kind of said, you are the ones who've been pushing for it. You've already done a bunch of this research. Like, let's go try to figure out what we need to get this done. And we found out it wasn't a conflict of ideology with the roadmap at all. I think that, just the right team on the product side hadn't necessarily seen this in the context that they needed to see it in, meaning, back to the question of prioritizing, you got to speak a language of the product teams that you're working with and understand what their metrics are and what their KPIs are. So if I go to the activation team and I bring them a product that's primarily going to drive retention, they're not necessarily going to care about what I have to say. But if I go to the activation team with a thing that's going to drive a big top of funnel lift that, is a new partner that's going to promote Dropbox in their sign up flow, they might move mountains in order to make that work. So, crypto is a great example, and AI is another one, right? Like, your customers are like, what are you doing in AI? Who are you partnering with? And, I think it's a similar one where there's like you do partnerships to do them. Barney partnership's a great term. And 6 months later, there's like a retro. Why do we do this? And like, how many users did we have? And you're like, well, I don't really know. At the time, it seemed important. So I think having a consistent set of principles that you can point to, and depending on the company and the strategy, you may have to disagree and commit. But at least if you have that sizing exercise and you're consistent, you can at least point to something and say, this is why we did this partnership.
Yeah. And like communicating them with the team. I want to pick on some comments in the audience. Naresh said, great comment on sales team integration analysis to unlock more deals. I agree. With product partnerships, it's so easy to like immediately target your product team and go like, hey, can you guys build me this integration? And that's going to be a waste of time because they have other things they want to do, or they might not see the value in it. But your sales team sees the value and actually can, make a really compelling case for the millions of dollars you might be able to win if you actually have that integration. We also have Faris, who is excited to join this chat. Great to see you, Faris. And we have Zagar, who joined us as well today. Thanks so much for tuning in. And we have Danielle, who shows up as LinkedIn user here. But she said, what a treat. 30 minutes of partner talk from Nick is priceless. And I agree. And we actually have another question from Faris as well, which I want to pick up is, what are some common KPIs for product teams when exploring an integration?
Yeah, it's what I was just hinting at in the most recent answer I was giving or comment I was making is, every product team is a little bit different. I think in general, right, most partnerships boil down to either, can you get me more users, which will convert to paying users and make me more money, or can you just straight up make me more money? Like, it's not, there's either, there's product usage, integration usage, and there's revenue, but those are the two things that everything sort of boils down to. But obviously there's a risk in oversimplifying. And so each product team is a little bit different, and it just depends on the maturity of the company, right? At Coda, our metrics look very different than they look at Dropbox. At Dropbox, if, a deal we're talking about is in the, hundreds of thousands to very low millions, it's interesting. Like, I won't decline to have that conversation, but at Coda, that would be, at the time that I was at Coda, at least, that would have been, a massive opportunity. I would have probably gotten, executives on the call with me. It just sort of depends on the stage and the company and the team. But in terms of the product team specifically, I think, look at how they're measuring it. So like I mentioned, activation, right? There's teams that are, they're purely just gold on signing up teams, retention, mobile, desktop, new products, core products that are kind of like existing or legacy. They all have different goals that they're working on. There are teams that their goal is to reduce the time it takes for somebody to upload a file to Dropbox, right? Like, what types of partnerships does that enable, and how might that be different than somebody whose goal is to sell to the large enterprise and talks about security partnerships all day, and may want to focus on customers and partners that help unlock that large enterprise that's more security conscious. So again, I think everything boils down to usage and money, but within those, there's buckets that I think you can then the more you learn about your product teams. One of my favorite teams I've ever worked with is a team that essentially was responsible for working very closely with the enterprise solutions team or a sales team and building the features that they were hearing from customers, right? So like somebody who's on the enterprise solutions team might hear, well, we need this in our admin console, or we need this data loss prevention feature, or we need this integration. And so this team, they were like a mini horizontal team that sat across all the different products that we offered, specifically focused on building this team. And I love that team because I knew exactly what made them tick. They wanted to close more enterprise customers, and they had a tight feedback loop with the enterprise sales team. So I could go bring them very interesting partnerships that we could action because we had a mutual kind of language that we spoke around what would get prioritized.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really like your point. Like, it really boils down to money, and it almost is like super simplified. Like, you either make more money or you stop losing money. And so usage is basically like retention. It's like customers who use a lot don't churn. And so within that, you probably like need to be more product specific on yourself and like what helps us make more money. Is it like upgrades from free users to paid plans? Is it like, upgrades from lower paid plans to higher paid plans like enterprise? Or, in usage side, like what drives more usage? But ultimately it all boils down to either like making more money or saving money. We also have Lincoln who joined us from the UK. Great to see you, Lincoln. Faris said the same. Good to see you, Lincoln. I wanted to dive in now, like more into like the actual building the integrations. Like, what options have you seen to actually get your integrations built? Like, let's say like, Coda and Hopin want to partner, like, what options exist for two companies to actually build these integrations?
Yeah, it's funny. When I was making a post, resharing that you and I were having this chat, I started listing out the different ways that you could get an integration built and how that's evolved a lot over maybe like the last 10 years or so. And I think I realized like it would take me more space than I had on LinkedIn to list out all the possible permutations and ways that you could get an integration built. But like it's truly amazing. Like 10 years ago, you built it or they built it, and that was it. If neither of you could build it, the conversation just stopped. And that dance still happens plenty of times. Like I'm about to get on a call after this where I'm sure that will happen. But generally speaking, now there is a few other options, right? So I build it, you build it. A third-party kind of developer shop that's focused on integrations builds it and manages it, builds it and hands it back to you to manage, builds it and launches it on the marketplace, like Salesforce, for example. As in Atlassian, they're full of third-party sort of partners who basically make a business out of looking at gaps and filling them with integrations. And so while the companies that are being integrated might support them in the building of the integration, it's like a fully independent business, one that kind of exists on its own outside of the swim lanes of those two companies. And their goal is to build a sustainable business, which I think is fantastic, right? If somebody can build that business and the incentives are perfectly aligned in that scenario, I actually would prefer that than paying a third party dev shop in many instances, because there the incentive is money, and when the money slows down, it may not be as pressing to update an integration. But so third parties, like this developer job. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, so if you like pay an agency just flat out and say like, hey, we want to build like the Hopin Coda integration, for example, they will charge you like whatever, like $50,000, $100,000 or something like that for the integration, but there's no incentive to do like a great job, I guess, because like once they ship it, it's like that's done. Versus like if they actually see it as a business opportunity, they actually have an incentive to like build something really great, because then more customers sign up, right?
Right. I mean, if I was being hyper cynical, there's almost an incentive to make it not good. So there's an increased dependency on that agency to maintain the integration, and therefore they've turned you into a recurring revenue business, what was meant to be a one-time engagement. But I'm not actually that cynical. I would say there are really good developers out there. I've partnered with some of them that will fulfill the obligation if they are smart. They know that if they do a really good job, there will be more integrations where those came from. Like nobody really does one integration and stops. And so the incentive there is to create an ongoing relationship with the SaaS company such that you're their go-to partner. And I've pulled the partners that I have had good experiences with. You mentioned my work history. I worked at a lot of companies. Like basically, if there's a SaaS productivity company, I probably worked there. And I've pulled a lot of partners and vendors that I've had really good relationships with from one company to the next, and given them, even if it's not a direct one-to-one of what I was doing at the previous company, I want to give them the opportunity to see if they can help me. So anyways, not to say I'm certainly not negative on that path. It's just you have to really know what you're getting into. You have to run a partner selection process. You have to manage that relationship. So it starts to sound like it's a lot of work, right? And so that's where I think that third party is a bit of like a mirage or an escape hatch for a lot of companies. They're like, we'll just get a third party to do it. But if you've been in the weeds with these third parties, like product, BD, it's the same amount of work or very similar amount of work, sometimes more. And if you don't have that muscle built already, the first time is going to be probably an even heavier lift. So, great option, not for everybody. Go in with your eyes wide open. The other option I really like is iPaaS or workflow automation platforms. But even within that, there's paths, right? Like I feel like I need to grow my hair out and get in front of a whiteboard and look like the nutty professor. But there's a flow chart here, right? Of all these different options. And maybe you and I can collaborate on actually getting this down into a visual. But within iPaaS, there's the true iPaaS, which is a developer targeted offering. So Merge is my favorite example of this, merge.dev. They do a lot of HR tech, but they've just gotten so good at integrations that they've expanded to project management and many other different verticals because they just nailed this motion of building these really tough integrations. But they got their start in HR. So raise your hand if you've ever seen anybody get excited about building a Workday integration, right? People are terrified of certain APIs and although I should say Workday is improving drastically, but
you're being politically correct. I like it.
Yes. Yeah. To my friends at Workday, you guys are doing great. I love Merge because they went and tackled those. Those are the most difficult integrations, right? Those are the ones where teams put off because it's so much work, and they said we're gonna make that our moat, that we're gonna go build these really difficult integrations. And so then the pitch to your product team is if as a BD person is, hey, if you can light up these 5 or 6 integrations, I can go do co-marketing. We can drive this top of funnel customer acquisition that I've been wanting to do. You just need to do this Merge integration. And they sell to engineers. They're not in this world of no code. It's very much it needs a product and engineering sponsor to be successful. Paragon is another one that does this well as well. But generally speaking, it's not just plug and play. It's very much has to be a part of your tech stack. You're introducing a massive dependency potentially on a third party that you need to be very confident in. But it's a great path. And then there's the Zapiers of the world, which are more end user facing, where it's hey, Dropbox and StreamYard want to work together. StreamYard has a Zapier integration. Dropbox has one. Let's just create a set of templates and send customers that way. And if that solves the use case, then fantastic. So even within that iPaaS segment, there's 2 different paths in my mind: the more developer centric and the more end user centric.
Yeah, with the developer centric one, the end user might not even know there is an iPaaS in between, right? I also see in the audience there's a lot of love for Merge from Naresh, and then Lincoln said there are actually B passes as well, like ReadyStack, which are from Martech. So you can see there's specialized iPaaSes where you actually have good integrations, because from our experience, if you have an iPaaS which does everything or says they do everything, they probably do nothing really well. And then you kind of end up in a weird situation where you're dependent on a third party, which actually doesn't deliver exactly what you need. So how do you choose? Like, if you're approaching a new partner, like, how do you know, like, should we go like either like force like our team or the partner's team to build it? Should we get an external developer that we either pay or that makes money otherwise to build it, or should we use an iPaaS? Like, which one of these like free or dozens of options really should you choose?
Yeah, and just to finish the thought, the last bucket is the and we were talking about at Coda and a gentleman named Scott. The last bucket to me is creating the developer tooling for knowledgeable and motivated members of your community, whether those are other partners, whether those are SIs, or just, a man with a dream in the case of Scott, who really liked the product Coda, but give them the tools to go build the integrations and close the gaps. And they might do it for their own use cases. They might, build a business for customers. And so in general, I think that's a really elegant solution, because if you can do it, because people will fill those gaps and create economic opportunities for themselves, and the incentive for everyone is aligned. Customers get the use cases they want. The company gets more platform usage and more scale than they'd be able to build themselves. So that third bucket for me is really interesting. People building those connectors on their own and investing in the platform. So I would say what matters, right? Like it's back to kind of chicken or pig, right? Like if it's strategic to, if you're a pig, like it's your skin in the game, it's strategic to you. Dropbox needs to own this workflow, and it's really important, and it's part of like, the core thing that we're offering. You're going to want to own that. And if you can't own it, then you're going to want to think about how strategic it actually is, right? So that's part one, is like, if it's very much a core part of your experience, that's like a company level OKR, that's something that everyone cares about, I do think you want to own that. And if you can't, you need to be very crystal clear on why. If it's in those kind of second and third buckets that we talked about, the things you want to think about are like, who owns frontline support? Like who does a customer reach out to when things don't work? What is kind of like the acquisition funnel and the sign up flow and the activation flow? Like, how are users getting onboarded to the integration or being made aware of the integration? And what is your sort of product flow? If it's an iPaaS solution, it's, are there 20 integrations you need, or are there 2? Because implementing an iPaaS is great if you need to scale to 20. If there's only 2, you may want to consider it's going to be a similar amount of work to truly implement an iPaaS. You may just want to look at building those 2 that are really strategic and owning those, and then kind of stopping there. If it's the ecosystem, are you prepared to invest in an ecosystem? Like, how many times have you reach out to a partner and they send you API docs and tell you to kind of like go have at it, have fun? In the case of Coda, if you're interested in building an integration, you will get API docs, you will get potentially like one-on-one time, you will get the opportunity to monetize whatever you build in the gallery. You'll get a referral code, so if people sign up through whatever you built, that you will get paid that way as well. You'll get the opportunity to list yourself as a partner that Coda can refer customers to when they want integrations built. To me, that's investing, right? That's like, we want an ecosystem. We want to open up the hood and let partners remix what we're doing. We want customers to have flexibility on who they work with. And so are you prepared to make those kinds of investments? Because if you don't, nothing's sadder than like a marketplace that launches with like 8 random cobbled together partners and then never gets updated in 2 years and sees another integration launch, right? Like we all have seen them. I've worked on them, I've done it, but I think if you have a thorough vision and are really strategic about cultivating a true ecosystem, you can make that a very attractive option for partners and for customers.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's also the easiest way to like get yourself out of a job if you just like launch a mediocre marketplace and then like nothing happens afterwards. So you as a partnerships professional really need to be able to like understand like, hey, what is my build by partner decision for my integrations? Like, am I gonna like build it myself? Am I gonna pay somebody to build it, or am I gonna partner on it? That last option is super interesting, and I know we're hitting up on time, but I do want to talk a little bit about indie developers, and specifically Scott, who you just alluded to as well, who is one of the indie developers at Coda. How did you find him, and like what happened?
Yeah, I'll have to make sure to send this to him afterwards. But Scott, and I could be fumbling, it's been a couple of years, but Scott was sort of a power user known within kind of Coda, the company, as somebody who was, building really excellent docs and doing complex things and signing up for all the webinars and programs that we had to teach people how to build. And so when I was working on the launch of the SDK, which enabled anybody to build a pack, which is an integration to Coda, we were looking at the list of kind of like power users of either the API or some of the existing integrations that we had. And I just think he was at like the top of almost every list. So we reached out, found that he was just incredible attitude, super motivated, loved Coda. And that time we were just looking for early adopters, right? So I think, you heard about Scott through a talk I gave where I said, you don't necessarily need to launch with like Microsoft, Slack, OpenAI, Figma, like all these name brands. You can build something from the ground up with your most motivated users. And Scott was that. And so he learned the code to build these integrations. Like he was not an engineer or developer by trade. I believe he was a teacher. And he taught himself how to code for these integrations. He built 4 or 5 of some of the most requested integrations for our launch, gave us a ton of feedback on the SDK along the way. And that was really important because the SDK was meant to be so that anybody could build an integration, not just hardcore developers. Fast forward 2 years later, and I can't take credit for this. I love the story. I think he stuck with it. He announced that he hit $1 million in lifetime revenue for his business of building docs and packs for customers. And he's built 180 integrations in total, or packs, which is just mind blowing, right? Like I was proud of 6 when I gave that talk 2 years ago. He's at 180. So if you give them the tools and you work with them and you meet them where they are, I do really feel like that's an incredible asset. But I will say, like, I couldn't do that at certain companies. Like if we're selling to a large enterprise, they're not going to abide by an integration. They're not going to say this person or this consultant built this integration that we're going to use with 10,000 employees. So it really depends on the use case and how you structure it. But in general, I love stories like that because he created a business. And my favorite thing I'll just end with is, I'll probably mangle the quote, but Bill Gates says that a true platform is when the sum of all the participants in the ecosystem is worth more economic value than the platform itself. Like when people can build businesses, I think Shopify is a great example. Like their partner ecosystem, I think, makes more money than the core Shopify company, and I love that. Like it's incredible. So that's why that third option or that indie developer idea is so always interesting to me.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it's a great story, and like kudos to Scott to like earning $1 million off of like Coda integrations that he learned to code only like a couple of years ago. Like that's a phenomenal business. And it's also great to see like you as a platform, if you want to attract like these kind of indie developers, you need to be productive. Like you need to show them a way to make money. Either it's charging for the integration, either it's like by building custom integrations for customers. There are different routes to make money, but there needs to be like an alignment of incentive, as you said as well. And it's also great to hear that he was part of your customer base already, because that means that if he's a power user himself, he actually knows what he's doing, rather than some random developer you might bring in to build an integration who then actually has to first understand what actually is being asked from him. We are hitting up on time. Point. Yeah. And I know you're busy, so I just wanted to ask you, like, what is like one key takeaway you would give anybody who's watching today just about building integrations?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna just strain the metaphor one last time, but like know who your chickens and pigs are, right? Like I think go look at your current list of partners, and if you have a partner that is just hey, go build this, you build an integration, we'll list it somewhere, we'll send it an email. That's a chicken. But if you have a partner who's like, hey, you and I are very complementary, like DoorDash and Instacart, Uber and Instacart, my bad. They just announced that within Instacart, if you're an Instacart subscriber, you can now order from restaurants in addition to groceries. It's inside the app. It's integrated. All the restaurants are listed. Uber Eats will deliver those orders. It's all integrated via API. Uber will pay Instacart a referral for every single user that makes an order through the app. That's a pig, right? That's a product integration. Those are commercial terms. Those are mutually aligned incentives to grow. So go look and find who your chickens or pigs are and go double down on your pigs and, let your chickens roost on their own. And I think that you will be successful in whatever type of partner motion you're trying to build.
Nice. Find your most committed partners, your pigs. That's going to stick with me for a long time.
Yes. And don't call them pigs unless you explain the analogy first.
Unless you explain the analogy. I feel like with the analogy, it's actually quite flattering, but without the analogy, it's a bit too much.
The only time calling someone a pig is a compliment.
Yeah. Well, that is it for today's show. Thanks so much for joining us, Nick. And also, I want to shout out Sagar, Faris, Danielle, Lincoln, and Naresh for joining us live today. You could have been anywhere and you chose to be here, so that means a lot to me. And we will be back in 2 weeks with another episode, and I hope to see you there. Thanks, everybody.
Hark now, mates, lend an ear.
Hear us now.
Captain Franz at the helm, so steer. Gather round the partnership's deck.
Schrepf's command.
Tales from the leaders of the partnership train. So we chant by the podcast glow. Through veritable seas to boxes flow. Dar-o-die. Hoist the sail.